Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Be Her Village podcast. I am your host, Kaitlin McGreyes. Today, I am talking to Go Milk Yourself founder, Francie Webb. Francie is an incredible person who helps people of all kinds breastfeed. She started her company, Go Milk Yourself, talking all about hand expression, which is something I'm super passionate about. But today, we're actually going to be talking about how to set yourself up for breastfeeding success while you're still pregnant. The truth is that there are so many things we can do while we are pregnant, while we are expecting our baby, to set ourselves up for breastfeeding success. So without further ado, please listen to part 1 of our conversation, how to set yourselves up for breastfeeding success. Be sure to subscribe to the Be Her Village podcast, and you will get part 2 of this next week.
I was 100% dead set on exclusive breastfeeding. I am perfectly comfortable saying this to you now that I've supported hundreds of families who use combination feeding or formula only, but I really thought formula was poison back then. Like, I really thought I was going to harm my baby by feeding my baby formula. And that was because I was 100% convinced that my parents had screwed up my digestive system by feeding me a ton of processed food. And P.S., I have amazing parents. And in the last many years since having a baby, I have understood what an incredible job they did with us and that they weren't just screwing us up 100% of the time. Although now my tween probably thinks I'm doing that. But the bottom line is, like, I had this idea that like formula was this very bad food and that I couldn't give it to my kid. And so I think that part of the reason that I wanted to be an exclusive breastfeeder was because I wanted like not that, right? Like, I want to do it right. And it's so amazing looking back on that now, because the first thing that I talk to people about when I train them as professionals, and I often talk to lactation patients and doula clients about, is we're going to throw out the idea that there's a right way to do this and that there's a wrong way to do this. And instead, we're just going to discover the journey, however it goes, right? And so there I am, dead set on breastfeeding my kid. And I go to my hospitals. You know, this hospital, it was St. Luke's Roosevelt at the time. It's now Mount Sinai West. And I went to the hospital's newborn care class, as advised by my OB. And at the end of the class, the instructor asked if she could talk to me. And she pulled me aside, and I was like, this is kind of weird, but also great. I'm really excited to, talk about these things, prepare for my baby. And she said, I have to tell you something. Do not take this hospital's breastfeeding class.
Mm.
And I was like, what? Like, I was already signed up for it. I think it was either free or very cheap because I wasn't sad when I changed my plans. But she said, don't take this hospital's breastfeeding class. I will never forget what she said. She said, they're going to tell you that there's a right way to feed your baby and that you need a special pillow. And she said, instead, I want you to go to the Prenatal Yoga Center. I want you to take Andrea Sims Brown breastfeeding. I want you to take Andrea Sims Brown's preparing for breastfeeding class, and that's going to get you set up. And I went and took her class, and it completely shifted my life for many reasons. One being that I suddenly decided I wanted her job. And over 11 years, I became an IBCLC just like Andrea. She became my mentor. But looking back on it, I actually did the thing right. Just kidding. I didn't do it right. But I did the thing that I would recommend now for someone to do, which is get excellent prenatal education with someone you trust and have that person waiting to be on your team. Like, I went to her class, and at the end of the class, she said, here's my card. You get a discount for taking this class if you decide to work with me. And I knew that it was what seemed an exorbitant amount of money to work with her. It wasn't covered by insurance. It was going to be what felt like a huge amount of cash. And I was already so nervous about having a baby in New York. So I was like crossing all my fingers and toes that nothing went wrong with breastfeeding, that's in quotes, so that I didn't have to pay all of this money. But I also was like, if there's anything funky, this woman's got my back and my boobs. Like, she is my person. I just could tell. We just connected, and I trusted her, and I could see how she interacted with people. And I knew that she could help me solve any problems that came up. And then I also knew she had a breastfeeding group that was either, I don't think it was free, but it was like really inexpensive. And so I went to that. But I'm telling you this because the question you ask, essentially, like, what can I do now so that my feeding journey works later, right? And now is the time before baby comes and later is after baby comes, is you can do just that. You can find people you trust. And in today's world, there are so many people you can choose from. Like you can choose essentially a talking head on Instagram, which I think I am for some people. I went to this conference. I went to the Lactation Network's conference last month, and I'm walking into my session, and this woman was like, "Oh my God." And she didn't quite touch me, but she kind of put her hands like almost around my face. And she was like, "This face." And I was like, "Hi." And she's like, "I feel like I know you. You've talked to me so many times on Instagram." She's wonderful. We've connected. She's great. But like you can choose people that you will never ever talk to live to trust, right? And
Mhm.
then you can also get completely overwhelmed by the choices. And you can also get a whole lot of crappy advice from people. But what it really comes down to is like, where do you choose to get the information that is going to serve you? And you will know that that information serves you first based on how you feel. Like, do I feel completely panicked after I talk to this person? Or do I feel like, wow, I'm heard? I feel taken care of. I feel like I can look at this from a more objective standpoint because I don't have as many worries and concerns as anxieties because this person has kind of assuaged those for me, right? So it's like choose where you're going to get your information and then get the information that helps you.
This idea of like lining up a feeding specialist essentially before your birth, there's something that just sort of clicked in my brain because what is like one professional almost every single new parent lines up before their birth? A pediatrician, right? Like everyone goes
Of
and searches for a
course.
pediatrician.
Yes.
So why would we
They
not?
interview multiple or do like a meet and
There's a
greet.
whole thing. They're reading Google reviews, they're asking their friends and their sister-in-law. Like everybody's putting so much energy into selecting a pediatrician, which actually is probably also one of the things on the list, right? So we'll get to that.
Totally.
But I
Yeah.
feel like what I love to do, and obviously I've done this with Be Her Village, I love to take like things that are familiar and just shift them a little. Like so the idea of going and searching for a professional to assist you with your baby in the postpartum time is a really normal part of pregnancy. Why would we not, as people who are breastfeeding, set that up? And it's not because we are expecting our baby to be sick, right? We're not doing it because we think something horrible is going to happen. We're doing that because you need a pediatrician, you need to get vaccines, you need to get, care, you need to get professional eyes on your baby because you do not need to know and be all and everything. Like literally that's why I go to the pediatrician. So I no longer have to like take the final responsibility sometimes for my children's health. So I think what you just said is such like a huge thing of just like how do we support that breastfeeding relationship? You set up that professional relationship beforehand. You set up that feeling of like having someone in your corner
Yeah.
because that moment where you are in crisis, right? That where the or close to crisis, where like the latch isn't latching, the milk isn't flowing, the baby's not pooping. Like I've been there, it's like something is wrong. That is the last thing you want to do is go read a Google review. The last thing you want to do is like talk to a receptionist and figure that you want to text the person who already knows you, your experiences, your wishes, your everything, and get like real advice almost immediately.
Yep.
And that's huge. I love that.
Yeah. It's just asking yourself, who am I going to go to? And I don't want people to have on their mental load finding that person and meeting that person and seeing if it feels like a good fit after baby comes. Like that's actually some pretty easy legwork to do. Like I will have a 10-minute conversation with somebody before their baby comes, and they'll be very clear on whether I'm the person to work with them or not. And it just takes 10 minutes. But like 10 minutes when you just had a baby turns into hours and days and weeks. And then suddenly you're in pain and not getting help because you're so overwhelmed by like, I don't know who to go to. And so
Yeah.
create your go-to person or people. It can be multiple people. I have a
Right.
couple patients with some pretty complex cases who work with multiple lactation consultants, and those professionals and I consult with each other. Or maybe they need some kind of specialist like an OT or an SLP, or, there are all these amazing people who can help us with babies. But if you establish your go-to person ahead of time and get that off your plate, lighten your mental load, then all you have to do, I tell people all the time, I always use the word retain, like if you have a prenatal lactation session with me, you've retained me. You don't have to work with me. You can go choose to work with someone else after your baby comes if you want. And also, like, I'm all yours so that when your baby comes, we can FaceTime from the hospital. I was FaceTiming with somebody, and her friend had actually gifted her my services. This is before I could take insurance directly, had gifted her my services beforehand as like her baby shower gift, right? And she texted me and she's like, baby's here, but no one's been able to get her to latch. And at this point, the baby's, a couple hours old. And I said, okay, I'm gonna call you in 7 minutes. Like I knew that's exactly when I was gonna be free. And I FaceTimed her and I could only talk for 3 minutes until my next call. And I told her, and I said, here's what we're gonna do. Okay. And I mean, she'd had a prenatal session where we'd walked through optimal positioning and baby's reflexes. And like I'd asked her all the intake questions. So I didn't have to ask anyone then. And I had 3 minutes and I said, here's what you're gonna do. And I guess we're on FaceTime. So here's what we're gonna do. And she texted me when I was into my next meeting and she said, the baby's latched. Thank you so much. Like I was just a
Wow.
couple minutes into my next, I think it was 7 minutes after we talked or something. And her
Wow.
baby was latched and she had a successful breastfeeding journey. But like it was so easy for me to help her in that moment. And like think about it from her standpoint. It was easy for her to get the help that made the immediate difference because we had had a 30-minute conversation ahead of time. That's all. That's all it took.
Wow.
So it's really like it's a pretty big return on investment, honestly.
That's absolutely huge. So people can book with you for a prenatal lactation education or consult or something where it's like you don't actually have to have a baby to talk to a breastfeeding specialist.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that. And like what I did was I went to a breastfeeding class and they walk out of it. Like I have clients and patients who are texting me and they're like, "Oh my God, I think I might be able to do this thing now." And it's because they got that education, right?
Right.
So there are different ways that people find their lactation consultant. And then there's some people who go to the website of one of my billing companies and pops in like I need someone in this area or I need someone in this time frame and then I happen to be matched with them. But you can find your person ahead of time and that surprises people. Like I had someone recently who filled out the inquiry form for a session. Her insurance was going to completely cover it. We got confirmation and she hadn't booked her session. And I messaged her and I said, "Hey, just wanted to check in. How are you and baby doing? When would you like to do a session?" And she's like, "Oh, I figured my baby's coming in January. I figured I would book after she comes." And I was like, "Great. We actually have the option too." And I explained to her what happens in the prenatal session and she booked it. And now that moment in January is going to be easier for her. And honestly, it's easier for me because I know the person. But also, there's some important questions that your lactation consultant needs to ask you before they make recommendations. Like, have you ever had breast surgery? Do you have gestational diabetes? Are
Mhm.
we expecting a cesarean birth? How many babies is this? Some of the questions asked are about your hormonal history. Like these are questions about your medical history that will indicate, like, if someone is dealing with a thyroid disorder, has hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism, there may be some challenges that come up with milk production, either overproduction or low supply related to that. And it sucks to hear that as a surprise. But if you do a prenatal visit with someone and you ask, like if I ask someone those questions, then I say to them, here are the things we're going to look out for. Or it might be a great idea for you to express some colostrum or express some colostrum before baby comes. Like we're going to run different plays according to what your body's been up to. And none of it is bad what your body's been up to, but it's great if you can get off to a smooth start, and things are
Mhm.
going to be smoother if some of those things are just wrapped up and taken care of. And, in the hospital, most people in this country give birth in the hospital, and most people have to answer the same question a bunch of times, and it's really annoying.
Often
So
during labor.
I exactly. I will never forget like the many moments as a doula where I've had to say, "Can you wait till the contraction's over before you take her vitals or ask that question?" Or like someone's just straight up having a very loud conversation in the room while the person is really focused through their contraction, right? So if I can help you have less work later, have fewer questions to answer later, I'm going to help you do that. And so if someone does a prenatal lactation session with me, I am ready and waiting when their baby comes. And sometimes that's a FaceTime situation from their hospital bed. And sometimes that's I'm going to their home. About right now, 15% of clients I'm seeing in home visits where I live in the Richmond, Virginia area. But primarily I do telehealth. And so sometimes they are home from the hospital and they're like, here's what's going down. And we work from there. But if we work together postpartum, the results are going to be better. The effectiveness is going to be higher. And these may seem like weird words to use when talking about feeding a baby, because sometimes it feels like all gray area, you know?
Hmm.
But at the same time, most of us are actually committed to being effective in the areas of our life that are important to us, whether it's in our job, with our kids, it might be with our health, it might be in our relationships. Like we actually want those things to go well. We want them to go the way we want them to go. And so you can up the chances of being effective at feeding your baby and having an experience that you're psyched about if you have put in a little bit of work on the front end.
I love that. And I think that really is like sort of a really cool reframe, right? From just like people can be like, "Oh, I hope breastfeeding works out for
Oh,
me,"
there's
which is like
so much hoping. Yes.
so passive. And I understand like so much love to the people who frame it like that because sometimes when I'm really nervous about something that I care a whole lot about, I will like try to trick myself into like it's fine either way, even though I'm like it's actually not fine, but I'm trying to like almost talk myself down ahead of time. But there's something so powerful about setting a goal and setting an intention and putting some energy behind that intention. And what you're talking about is exactly that. It's not that a prenatal lactation session is going to like magically make breastfeeding perfect. It's that the chances of you setting that goal to breastfeed, connecting yourself with the right supports, getting educated, and putting that energy into achieving that goal, the chances are it's going to happen. Way more likely it's going to happen and work out than if you didn't do any of those things and you just sort of wished, right? Like that's the
Totally.
difference.
Totally. I know. Listen, I mean, I really wish my kids would just clean their rooms without me asking them to. I really wish and hope that, but like that makes no difference.
It
And if
makes
it's
no
dead,
difference.
it's like we're gonna go on a little girls' afternoon out on Sunday afternoon, but you got to clean the guinea pigs cage first, and your rooms have got to be straight. They got that done, you know? But there was no
Absolutely.
hope involved.
There's no hope. I mean, literally, we have a chore board in our house. Like, actually, it's not even a chore board. It's a daily schedule that right now says Happy Sunday. So, we don't do it every day, but it's Tuesday for
Totally.
anyone who's listening. But it's like, it's this intention. It's, hey, here's what's going on today, and here's the chores that need to happen. And it's very much like that, right? Like, okay, so breastfeeding will be the end result. What are the steps we're taking beforehand? Getting in touch with somebody who's a breastfeeding professional that feels good for them in the prenatal time, like actually make the contact, not just get a phone number or a website, like actually
Establish
connect.
a relationship with that person.
I
Yeah.
love that. And so what's next? I brought up pediatricians. Is that on your list? Does the pediatrician
Yeah, that's a really
play a
great question.
role?
Before we go there, I just want to say one more thing related to the hope conversation.
Mm,
It's the need conversation. Sometimes people will be like, I don't think I need a lactation consultant, or I don't know if I
mhm,
need to find that person right now. And I want to be clear, I am not saying that anybody needs that. Like, that is not who I am, and that is not how I communicate with people, and that is not how I relate to people that, like, you need to do this. Or if you don't do this, something bad will happen. Like, nothing like that. Rather than asking yourself, do I really need this? Do I really need to spend time or spend money or fill out this form to see if my insurance will cover it or maybe pay out of pocket? Do I really need this? Ask yourself, what would it take for me to have what I want?
mm.
What would it take for me to optimize this experience? So, like, if someone said to me, I'm not sure I need the prenatal session. First of all, I could say to them, I actually need the prenatal. I could always play it that way. I'd be like, you may not need the prenatal session. However, it's going to make a big difference for me in serving you to get this information now. Can we have that conversation? And that's one way to kind of spin it, if somebody's on the fence about it. And the conversation that I want to have with people is always like, I'm not at all saying you need this. You're not, there are no holes in you waiting to be filled. There's no lack in who you are or what you are capable of having or accomplishing. And if you have this session, might it make a difference for you? And I
Mm.
usually would have that conversation by being like, well, what are your goals? And that's the first conversation that I have with people in a prenatal meeting is like, tell me your goals, tell me your fears and anxieties. Like, tell me what you're committed to in feeding your baby. So I just wanted to address that like sometimes people have that, well, I don't know if I need to spend my time or money or energy on this. And actually, if we instead just flip that conversation into what would it take to support
Mm.
me optimally?
I love that.
let's like get on that train and ride it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I also, just to like piggyback upon that, I think one of the things I've seen the most in my doula practice is this reframe of like something you need versus something your baby deserves. Like,
Ah,
because so many people, and I'm totally guilty of this, like, will not do for me. I don't need, I can go without, I can go without. But like, my kid, boom, here, they get whatever. Like, I am here to pour my resources into my kid. And when you reframe it as like, my kid deserves the best chance at this breastfeeding relationship, which includes educating myself and supporting me, it
that's right.
sometimes can like be the difference between that. And I love that. And I love this like, it's a mindset issue almost. That's, I feel like that's what we're dancing around. There's a mindset approach. It's not pass fail. It's not, like only in crisis and no other time. It's not, it's really just setting these goals and setting yourself up for success in the best way that you and your baby can. And it sounds very relaxing. I have to say, it sounds like a checklist that you can like just check off the things that you've done, and then you feel closer and closer to being prepared as you check off those things.
Absolutely. Yeah, you
All
really
right.
do.
So
It gives you more peace of mind, and that's what we're really about.
peace of mind is everything. And honestly, like one of one of the goals that I always work with people on is that peace of mind, because it's in many ways sometimes the only thing we can control, right? Like we can do all those things, but like the goal should be peace of mind, because no matter what comes our way, peace is what we can have and what we should strive for. So I want to know what else is on your list, but I have something that I wanted to ask about, and maybe it's the same thing that's on your list in terms of like prenatally. How can we set expectations, educate, prepare, plan, whatever we want to call it? How can we create the non-professional support? Meaning, like, how do we get our moms and mothers-in-laws, our partners, our jobs? Like, how do we, you and I could talk about professional support to no end, because it is just such a part of the quote unquote village. It has shifted into the hiring professionals to help us through these moments. But the comments that our mothers, mothers-in-law, partners, families, friends make in those most vulnerable moments can also make or break the entire experience. And honestly, even if it doesn't make or break it, it can make it feel like terrible versus feeling hopeful and supportive. So, what is your recommendation about ways to do that? Like, how do we approach the non-professional supports in our pregnancy as we prepare for feeding our babies?
This is such a timely question because I had a prenatal with someone the other day, and she said, my mom's going to be here, and my mom's advice about breastfeeding is just all really outdated. And the first thought that popped into my mind is, I bet her mom told her to rub sandpaper on her nipples. And she
Uh,
goes, Mom told me to rub sandpaper on my nipples. And I was like, I knew she did.
okay, pause. I have been a doula for 11 years now, and I have 3 kids, and I breastfed all of them. And I've literally never heard this before. And thank God I've never heard this before. What is this piece of bad advice?
Well, you need to toughen them up, you know? You
Oh
got to
my
toughen them up.
God.
I
These
know.
poor nipples, these
I
poor
know those
people
poor
who own
nipples.
those nipples.
Right. So step one, do not listen to anyone who tells you to put sandpaper on your nipples or like a hard wet washcloth. People will be like, just get a really like scratchy washcloth. I'm like, we're not doing that. Okay. And I think the most important thing is communication. And communication is kind of the big picture here, because the small picture is there's some things you're going to tell people and some things you're going to choose not to tell people.
Hmm.
And so choose what is critical for you to communicate. And when I use the word critical, I mean what has to be communicated for you to have the experience you want. What has to. But then also look at if your communication is sufficient. Like if I only tell them, if I only communicate these things, is that enough to give me the experience that I want? Or is there more information that I needed? Like when I chose to have a home birth with my second baby, I did not tell most people in my life. I was like, I'm only going to
Yeah.
tell the people, who I'm only going to, they're basically a select few I'm going to tell. And that's because it's critical for them to know, because I want to be able to share with them in an ongoing basis how I'm preparing for this birth and how this birth went. And second, is it sufficient? Like, are these enough people for me to have the experience that I want? And like, I have some close members of my family who did not find out that we had the baby at home until weeks after, and that we planned to have the baby at home until weeks after. And that worked for us. But I think the most important thing is communication and filtering what comes, like not filtering. It's more like choosing intentionally what to communicate and then how to be communicated with. And be somebody who is comfortable throwing people's opinions out the window, because people are going to make comments and give advice, and it's going to be unsolicited, and strangers on the street are going to tell you. I mean, I had a neighbor when I was pregnant with my second. I had a neighbor who was walking behind me in my apartment building, and she said, "Ooh, look at that Fanny. How much weight have you gained?"
Oh my God.
And I was like, I'm going to punch you in the face right now. Like, I couldn't believe she said that. And, and I mean, this was a neighbor I had a good relationship with. And I just said, I have absolutely no idea, but I know that I'm having a healthy pregnancy, like I just kind
Yeah.
of nipped it in the bud. But I couldn't believe that somebody would say that. But, I think that think about what's most important to you and think about who needs to know what's most important to you. And the people who need to know what's most important to you might be people who are coming to help you postpartum if you have anyone doing that.
Right.
Or if there's someone in your life who's going to ask you 11 questions after your baby is born about like, how's baby? What are you doing? How's feeding going? Whatever, like communicate with them, whatever they need to know so that they'll ask fewer questions later. Or let them know that I'm not going to be available for your questions. But one of the things I said to my mom early on, and my mom and I have a fantastic relationship, she said something to me about like, I said how tired I was after having my second. And she said, well, try having 4 in 4 years. And I just said, Mom, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
And like my mom immediately got it. And she didn't say things like that after.
It's not a
She-
competition,
yeah.
right? It's not a competition. And I think with like what your mom said, which feels like, feels probably in the moment, it probably was just like, just came out without thinking. But I think one of the things that happens with mothers and mothers-in-law when they watch their daughters and daughters-in-law give birth is there is this competitive thing that happens, even if it's not conscious, or there's
Yeah.
a feeling of judgment, like, well, I didn't breastfeed, or how could you be tired? I was more tired, or, why aren't you giving
I
formula? I
I
gave
never
formula.
used a pacifier with my babies.
Right, right. There's this feeling of like, it's not, we can each have our own experience. It's a really different lens. And it's interesting because I think it's part of, and this would be a really interesting separate conversation. It's part of like that matriarchal like shift in power and in energy within a family structure, especially with that first grandbaby. It's like going from the mother. I mean, we're both sitting deeply in that state in our families right now, so deeply, Francie, so deeply. As I don't know if anyone can hear, but like my children are melting down outside of this room
Nope,
because it's
can't hear
election
it.
day. Oh, great, good,
Great.
just me. But it's like we are so firmly like the center of the families right now. We know every single thing that goes on with our children, every choice, I remember at a time I knew every word my son learned because I knew every word he had ever heard in his life because we just spent all our time together. Like there's this
Yep.
really like you're the center of the family. And then there's a shift as you become a grandmother or a grandparent, and it's different, and it's not always so smooth for grandparents, and there's something about the way we feed our babies that can trigger a lot of shame and guilt and competition, and these remarks that are just sort of unhealed. There's just like something unhealed in them, and it can add that stress. And so what I'm hearing you say is like, how do we prepare? We prepare by getting boundaries and getting really solid boundaries and feeling really firm in them. And I love that so much because I am such a proponent of like, we are going to learn the lessons we have to learn. And it's some of us learn it during our fertility journey. Some of us learn it during our pregnancy. Some of us learn it in the middle of birth, right? And some of us learn it in the postpartum. But like those skills, and the postpartum being, the rest of your life, but those skills of like letting go of other people's opinions, of staying firm in your choices, those are the skills of becoming a parent. Because whether it's with a pediatrician or a school teacher or your own child when they're a tween, there is this like need to develop your sense of self, and it can start with those boundaries in the pregnancy time around the feeding choices.
Yep, 100%. And for those of you who are listening or watching this, if you don't know Melissa Urban, she wrote, I believe it's called The Book of Boundaries, but she wrote a book about, Melissa Urban is well known for developing the Whole30 and has written a number of books, mostly about like nutrition and kind of your relationship with food. But she wrote a book, she's been big into boundaries in the last few years, and she wrote a book about boundaries. And one of the things I remember, I listened to a podcast about her book and about boundaries. She said, a boundary isn't me telling you what to do. A boundary is me communicating what I will do if you do or don't do X, right? Like this is the choice that I'm going to make, you know? And it's as simple as like sometimes if my toddler's having a total meltdown about she wants to read 3 books instead of 2, but we just did a whole sleep training situation with an amazing sleep coach and we've agreed to 2 books. It's only 2 books. If she's having a meltdown about the third one, sometimes the boundary is like, I'm actually going to step out until you're done with your tantrum because like I just cannot be with that tantrum right then, you know? And if I communicate that to her, she often makes it change right then because I'm like, here's what I'm going to do if you keep doing this thing that I'm not really up for right now, right? But I think that establishing like what you're available for and not available for is really important. And like, let's just take a moment to honor the many, many, many people who have come before us who have not gotten what they wanted in their feeding journey, in their birthing journey, in their postpartum journey, right? Like my mom had a very, she had a traumatic experience trying to get lactation advice at a LHA Lake meeting when she had her first baby and felt very, very shamed that she was using some formula with her baby. And like it really turned her off to seeking further advice. And so, you know, if at some point when my mom said something like try having four kids in 4 years, or like three in diapers at the same time or whatever, she says something like that, like I want to honor that she's probably never been given an opportunity to talk about that or process that or even just share what it was like for her to anybody, right? And we have a lot more awareness like in mainstream conversation about the difficulties of having babies and the challenges of the postpartum period and of pregnancy and birth and all of it, parenting. So maybe she's never had an opportunity. And also, like, if I'm gonna, you know, if I'm not available for that conversation right then, I'm definitely gonna let her know. And like newly postpartum, I was not available for that.
Yeah.
You know, maybe
Yeah.
when I go home and see my mom over Thanksgiving, I would be like, Mom, what was it really like for you? And then she actually has
Yeah.
space to communicate that. So sometimes people are saying things because they didn't get what they wanted and they don't know what else to do with that, but just like kind of insert it into our space. And then we get to choose if we are going to have that in our space or not.
Yes. I love that, Francie. That's wonderful. So we've talked about creating relationships with breastfeeding specialists, taking breastfeeding classes, or having a consult. We've talked about choosing pediatricians that feel good to us and who know the limitations of their training. We've
Yeah.
talked about setting boundaries for ourselves, while also like creating space and leaving room for the people that we love and their motherhood experiences, but maybe 10 years later at Thanksgiving. I love that.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there anything we've missed? Is there something else that we should be using, or putting on our list of things to sort of prepare ourselves as we endeavor to feed a little baby?
Yeah. The birth experience informs the feeding experience. And,
Mm.
you know, back when I first was like dipping my toe into the doula world and lactation world, which really started to happen at the same time, I thought that that meant your birth had to go this certain way and not that other way in order for it to be successful. No, what I'm saying is like, choose a team that really works for you to have your baby and a place where you're going to have your baby where you feel heard and cared about and taken care of, and choose members of your team who are going to support you in getting the things that feel important to you, whatever they are. And setting yourself up for that during your birth often means that you can have a more successful experience getting what you want with feeding. Not always, but sometimes, you know, I see patients sometimes who their feeding experience isn't going like at all the way that they wanted. And sometimes it's because they had a sucky OB or they gave birth at a hospital that was rife with terrible advice for helping their milk, you know, come in, as people like to say. But like I'm thinking of one person in particular who had her baby at a place where postpartum is kind of sucky. The OB experience was great, but like her baby had a severe tongue tie and could not transfer milk at first. Like it was like the most extreme tongue tie I've ever seen. And the people in postpartum were saying they weren't going to give her a pump to use because she needed to try nursing first. And I ended up like, finding one of the head lactation consultants at that hospital and being like, please get this woman a pump. So, setting yourself up to have your baby in a place where you're going to be able to get your questions answered, your concerns addressed, and yourself really well taken care of, that's going to help create an environment where you can be successful in the ways that you want.
I love that. The birth experience is, in so many ways, I always make this analogy. It's like the wedding day to the marriage, the birth experience or the birth time or day to the rest of parenthood. Like, it's wildly important. I'm not trying to undercut that at all. It is so, so, so important. It is something that deserves planning and intention and hoopla and excitement, And also, it is the first day of literally the rest of your life as a parent.
Yes.
And it is something, though, like if your wedding gets flooded and destroyed and somebody gets hurt and there's fights and like, that is the beginning of probably a tougher marriage, right? And that is often, or at the very least, it starts on a sour note. And that is often what happens with birth. I remember my birth just I always say it went sideways. Like, it was just not what I expected it to be. I was just so like systematically stripped of humanness and of voice and power and any say in what was going on. And I remember just sitting there feeling that, sitting in my beginning of motherhood with exhaustion, complete, utter, unspeakable exhaustion, brokenness, and just feeling the least powerful I had ever felt as a human being, but definitely as an adult.
Yep.
And that was where I launched into motherhood. No wonder I had postpartum anxiety. Like, it's not even a question to me why that happened, because the whole entrance was just difficult, and the breastfeeding relationship was difficult along with it. And it's unfortunate. It's just the story that's my story. But like, what you just said, the birth experience informs the feeding experience, is just the truth. And so there is a lot of energy that you can put into lining up. I mean, there's a theme here, Francie, let's be real. There's a theme of trying to have a human respected experience.
That's right.
In a broken system where the infrastructure does not support it. The infrastructure gives us 1 6-week postpartum visit with an OB, crappy postpartum care, and a pediatrician that knows nothing about breastfeeding, except that their entire job is to make sure the baby is fed and healthy. Like, it's sort of mind-boggling. And I think that's almost like the elephant in the room that is not being said, is like, we are talking about a system that's broken.
It feels very like rock in a hard place, right?
It does. And it's why, but it's just wild. Like, that is part of the context. And I don't say that to make people feel uncomfortable or make people feel scared. It's just, I almost say it to validate you coming here and seeking out information. I say it to validate the fact that in each of this list, it's all about finding people that feel good to you, finding people that are informed, and creating that quote unquote village of support, and having the professionals and the non-professionals around you in a supportive way. We have to put intention into that, because it is not automatic. Because if you don't put intention into it, then you end up with a vastly different experience. This conversation with Francie is part 1 of a 2-part conversation. That's number 1. Next week, we are going to release the full conversation about how to choose a breastfeeding literate or a breastfeeding friendly or a breastfeeding supportive pediatrician. That pediatrician choice, honestly, for myself and for Francie, I will share my story next week, is one of those forks in the road. It's often the point where people actually abandon or feel like they have to stop their breastfeeding journey. That decision gets made in the pediatrician's office when we're told this isn't working, your baby is not gaining enough weight. So we're going to dive into all of that and what we can do to set ourselves up for success through our pediatrician choice. Until then, go to our show notes. You can find Francie's information. You can create your Be Her Village registry, and you can download the free guide to setting yourself up for breastfeeding success. So go check all of that out, and I will catch you next week on the Be Her Village podcast. Bye.